Hi, every one of us is leaving a legacy, and every ideology in the world leaves a legacy behind it. So just for a few moments I want to investigate that with you. And first up I want to look at what is the legacy of atheism. What is the legacy that atheism is leaving behind? And first up we have this issue of racism. Now you might say, oh, hang on a minute, that's a very strong condemnation. But look at even the way it presents itself, from the black ape to the white human being. This is what we're being taught now, that if there is no God, then life has evolved over millions of years, and from the ape is where we've come from. And you can see straight away there's a problem with that. Now, people who hold to that position, they say to me that you need to read Charles Darwin's book, Origin of Species. But I always ask, what is the original title of that book? Now, either the atheist doesn't know, or he doesn't want you to know. But this is the original title of the book, On Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. And you can see in the title of the book, it is a racist philosophy. It begs the question, are you one of the favoured races or one of the non-favoured races? Now, how is that seen today? One of those ways is when a man of a certain skin colour is playing sports, the people in the stand, they're making ape-like gestures at him. They're waving bananas. They're making ape-like noises. And you can see the direct correlation between that behaviour and this philosophy. And it's a terrible blight on the human race, isn't it? It's not just Lewis Hamilton that quite rightly says that's wrong. It needs to be stopped. We need to address the issue. And as we address the issue, we need to think about this attitude, this belief that we're being taught. That's one thing. The second is the legacy of atheism is one of death. Now you might say, well, what on earth do you mean by that? Well, I'm referring to some of the scholarly works by people like Phillips and Axelrod and R.J. Rummel, and they demonstrate that there have been more lives lost by non-religious dictators than anyone else. And they give the figures. And we can think of people like Pol Pot and Stalin and Lenin and Mao Zedong. Now I know that there will be those that try to reverse that trend and say the opposite. But look at the facts for themselves, and you can see that is absolutely true. The third issue is this one of intolerance. Now you may recognise the picture of the man there as Albert Einstein, and even in his day he was talking about fanatical atheists whose intolerance is the same as that of the religious fanatics. And sadly we are seeing a tremendous sense of intolerance from this ideology. One of the atheistic websites states that its goal is the end of all religious faith. It's not content to not have a religious faith of itself, but they don't want others to enjoy that faith either. It's not a thought of, well, we have different viewpoints. And you'll see that intolerance regarding this. And these people say that this theory of evolution must not be challenged. We mustn't even consider an alternative viewpoint. That is intolerance. It's a tragic legacy that is being left behind. But you'll say, hang on a minute, but what about religion? Hasn't religion caused a lot of problems in the world? And you're absolutely right. Yes, it does. So let's have a look at religion in general. What is the legacy of religion? And one of the things that we see is this sense of religious pride. This sense of, I'm better than you. I'm holier than thou. And sadly, that has led to so many other problems, where people are very proud about the way they live and the things that they do. And that pride is an awful thing, isn't it? That arrogance, that conceit. Pride can be a horrible thing. And sadly, it leads to further problems down the line. One of them is hypocrisy. Now, just because a man dresses up in fancy clothes and waves incense about and mumbles things, does that make him any better than anyone else? And one of the sad things that we've seen is that some of these people have been involved in evil acts with young people. They say one thing, they do another. Hypocrisy is an awful thing. And then, thirdly, one of the legacies it leaves behind is one of hatred. And whether we think of the troubles in Ireland or whether we think of the Crusades, we see there the hatred that is often generated. And that hatred often spills over into bloodshed. We even see it within different factions of the same religion. And you think of the Sunnis and the Shiites and the hatred that they have one for another. It's an awful thing, isn't it? It's a horrible legacy. And I can understand when people say, look, I don't want to be associated with religion. I believe there is somebody out there. I want to explore my spiritual side, but I don't want to be involved in religion. And we can understand that, can't we? Now, let's have a look at this last one. And I want us to see here the contrast. And I want us to look at what is the legacy of Jesus in his own words, in his own actions. And first of all, we notice this. It's a legacy of love. He taught, love your enemies. He taught, love your neighbour as yourself. Could you imagine our world if everybody lived like that? If we loved our neighbours, the people next door, the people across the other side of town, neighbouring countries, our world would look very, very different, wouldn't it? Who's going to come along and say, oh, we don't want any of that around here. We don't want love your neighbour and love your enemies. See, we all know that that is excellent teaching. Now, Jesus not only taught that, but he lived it. There was no hypocrisy. He lived that out to the full. And we can see that through his life, it was a life of loving others. And he demonstrated that love in an amazing way when he went to the cross and willingly allowed people to take him outside of the city of Jerusalem and nail him to a cross. And all the while he was demonstrating love to his enemies. Now, the picture that I've got here is a mosaic that archaeologists have discovered. There are thousands of these. And it depicts somebody being mauled to death by animals. What was their crime? They weren't a murderer. They weren't a robber. Their crime was that they followed Jesus. That's barbaric, isn't it? But the thing I want to bring out from this is that it was noticed that when those people faced either dogs or other animals or gladiators, they would pray for them. They would pray for their enemies. They would pray that they might know and discover the love of God for themselves. That was a remarkable thing. Why did they do it? Because their master had left this legacy of love towards neighbours and even enemies. Secondly, the legacy of Jesus is one of forgiveness. And on that historic event, when Jesus was nailed to a cross and our world did the very worst to him that we possibly could, we mocked him, we ridiculed him, we jeered at him, we spat at him. He was beaten, he was whipped. And on that cross, what was he doing? This was his prayer. He was praying, Father, forgive them. He wanted people to know forgiveness from God for the wrong that they had done. And he was praying for those that were doing it to him. Isn't that a wonderful thing? To seek the forgiveness of evil people. That's the legacy that Jesus has left behind. And you'll know that all over the world, that symbol of the cross has become the most used symbol. People have it around their neck, on t-shirts, tattoos, on buildings. That cross stands for the forgiveness that Jesus died to provide for people who've done wrong. People like you and me, so that we might know forgiveness of our every wrong, forgiveness of the things that trouble our conscience, so that we can know that ultimately every wrong thing has been dealt with, because that's why he went to that cross. He was paying for our wrong. He was taking the punishment in our place that we might be forgiven. And then lastly, the legacy of Jesus is one of hope. The Bible has a lot to say on that subject. And 3 days after Jesus had been publicly put to death on the cross, and you may know that on that day a soldier stuck a spear into his side and out flowed blood and water, medical proof that he was dead. And 3 days later, the grave was empty, the body could not be produced, and Jesus appears alive again to hundreds of people. He walked with them, he talked with them, he ate with them. And they saw that Jesus was alive again. And there he demonstrates hope for us. He proclaimed, I am alive forevermore. And that's why we can have hope in this life, hope in death, and hope in eternity, because he beat death, he rose from the grave, and it's God's great demonstration that the wrong that we have done can be completely forgiven when we turn to him and we put our trust in him, and we can know that forgiveness and we can know that hope in him. Now, this has perhaps raised questions for people, and if you have questions, then I'd love for you to just contact me and I'll try and answer your questions as best I can. Perhaps for others, you said, well, perhaps I need to reconsider this person of Jesus. I never saw the difference between Jesus and religion before. I thought it was all one and the same. Well, if that's you, then please contact me and I'd love to send you something, a Bible or part of the Bible or something else that might be helpful to you. There may be others, and perhaps you say, yes, I can see the love of God demonstrated in the life of Jesus. I believe that he died on that cross so that I can be forgiven. I believe that he rose again from the dead so that I can have this hope in him. If that is you, then you can come to him right now and you can pray and ask him to forgive you and come into your life and change your life. If you do that, please contact me, and I'd love to send you something that would be helpful to you as you start your life as a Christian. But thank you very much for listening. May God bless you.